You look good.
We try.
I'm,
We try harder.
you try and you come through. You succeed. Trying is important. Succeeding is nice too. Well, I've been rereading Confessions of a Young Philosopher, which is always for me a page turner. And as I go through paragraph by paragraph, I have many questions, and we don't have endless time, so I boil them down to I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10. And you're you and a group of sort of like grad students, I guess, who all got Fulbright grants to come
Yeah,
to Paris for a year. Well,
yeah,
Paris is a complete culture shock, you might say, totally different
yeah.
from the America you grew up in, that you knew at the time of the 1950s. This was the button down generation of the 1950s. And Paris is not buttoned down. And you're just trying to figure out, what are you seeing? You write, in the metro, along the Seine's banks, the river banks, in the crowded alleys of the Latin Quarter, lovers walked. I did not know what they were. Had never seen anything remotely like them. Because in America, lovers didn't walk in this way you describe. It's almost a smooth, interlocking flow. And and you comment, unlike America, you say, on the social map, time and space for this had been cleared. What ideas were being acted out here? What I then surmised, and I am not now possessed of better information, was that the quintessential French story on the subject of romantic love was Tristan and Iseult. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Tristan and Iseult. And maybe you could just say something about that. Of course, you say it in the book, but I think
yeah,
frame our
uh,
discussion of part
it's
one.
it's a medieval tale, probably existed in many variants, and the essential features are that Iseult is destined as a bride for the king, and Tristan, as a faithful knight of the king, has gone to fetch her from the kingdom where she now lives. She's a princess. And on the boat taking them back to King Mark's domain, they unwittingly both drink a liquid that is meant to support the royal marriage and render the drinkers hopelessly in love. And instead, it strikes both of them, it hits both of them, and they fall unlawfully and hopelessly and instantly into the passion of love. And it has, of course, no place in the social and political world that each belongs to. So it's immediately an outlaw um, experience, and eventually both die of it because they can't live it in the real world. And that I have been authoritatively told by a Swiss French philosopher is the essential French story. And long before I was told that, I had read the story and could more or less recognize it.
But you say here a social space had been set
Yeah,
aside, you might say, basically for this type of romantic love.
yeah,
And a lot of your
yeah,
experience is about both the allure and the limitations
yeah.
of
The,
that vision.
the modern version, the updated Tristan and Isolde, emphasize the erotic more than the supernatural character of this kind of Gnostic love. And it did clear a space and a time, but it was a limited space and time. And instead of conveniently dying, as the lovers did in the medieval prototype, they fall out of love. So
Correct.
it's got a temporal boundary as well as probably a spatial boundary. You do it in the Latin Quarter.
Yeah, so in some way it's fleeting, or at least,
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
it's
that's interesting.
transitory. Yeah,
And a few pages later, you raise this question. You're trying to figure out your place as a woman,
yeah,
both an intellectual and, but you might say foremost. It's hard to say which is more important, but anyway, certainly as a woman.
yeah.
And you raise this difficult question: is a woman who is not and has never been considered desirable as a woman just as much a woman as if she had been desired? And then you say, well, yes, motherhood, something like that. But it remains a question for you,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And explain, what is the role of desire in being a woman, or being anybody, maybe being a person?
The it's not conceded today. Feminism has um, blunted these outlines, but pre-feminist young womanhood was very well aware of what may be a perennial fact that a woman is vulnerable, not just vulnerable to rape, to pregnancy, and so forth, but vulnerable to the um, danger of not being desired. And that seems to go, at least in pre-feminist America, it was not discussed, but it was widely acknowledged in all kinds of ways, small and large, that your feminine dignity was at stake, your feminine um, authenticity, your feminine, well, I guess people would have said success, or at least the French spoke of le succès as, um, just as a man was to make money and be important and powerful, a woman was to be desired. And somehow, I mean, think of the um, physical um, uh, correlate of uh, desire. The woman awaited the man's entry, and she couldn't enter herself. There are things you just can't do to yourself. And I don't care how many how-to books people write and publish, it's not the same. And it's not the same, not just in terms of the boundaries of the sensation. It's not the same. And this was widely and almost, you might say, universally acknowledged in my young days. It's not the same socially, it's not the same in terms of some deeper sense of success that didn't have to do with whether or not you won the Nobel Prize. It simply had to do with, I guess we would say, being a realized woman, being a fulfilled woman. Those, that kind of language was not frowned upon. It wasn't used much out of fear, the fear that one wouldn't be a realized or fulfilled woman. We didn't talk about it, but conversation circled around that danger. One was endangered, vulnerable and endangered, in spite of all the free and easy style of the American girl, very different from the French, you know, primped up and cosmetically at the ready and languorously enraptured. That girl, we weren't, but we were as vulnerable as that girl.
You go on the very next page, and I'll put together several excerpts here. It seemed to me then that one rose above this female predicament at one's peril,
Yeah,
because such an effort to somersault out of one's chronological place and one's skin could leave one shorn of the erotic value that alone allowed one to escape being found ridiculous.
yeah,
But why wasn't rising above it an option, you ask? And going down a little, history in my eyes was not just a veil of exile from prelapsarian grace. On the contrary, it was the right place to be,
yeah,
the best place for God and me to hold our argument. Because for you, God is always a kind of, omnipresent, witness, as you put it. God is an ongoing witness. And what about the life of the mind? You wonder. Here you are, an intellectual, going to be a philosopher. What about the life of the mind, you ask? Aren't the ideas, as Plato said, eternal? Although I love the life of the mind, it was not for me a self-sufficient narrative. What I was interested in primarily was the truth about life, not the exercise of the mental faculties. For me, the truth about life was to be worked out between human beings and the historical God in settings that were real and concrete, not imaginary.
yeah.
So that's quite a set of reflections, and it's often talked as if people have various self-help approaches today. How some are kind of Eastern, you can step out it, you can the
Yeah,
power of now, uh, you invent yourself, you can leap above it,
yeah.
and you do not see those things happening. And I guess they seem what, imaginary?
They seem like they seem compensatory. They have around them as a sort of enveloping parenthesis, plan B.
Mm.
And okay, you can go to plan B, but only after you know for a fact that plan A isn't ever going to be yours. And but to pretend that these compensatory stratagems that replace for a woman romantic success um, are as good as or better than or um, put you at a higher plateau from which elevated place you can look down on the um, mad circus of life. All that strikes me as very disguised and very distinguished sour grapes. I knew what kinds of somersaults, internal somersaults you had to do to arrive there. And I was very busy trying to be transparent and simple and available to myself, to the world I would encounter, and to the witness that, without talking about it much, I implicitly assumed was watching. Witness meaning, if you will, if you don't like theism, truth. Truth was watching.
And it's truth in real life, I take
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and there are all kinds of wonderful cultures that practice tea ceremonies and practice hatha yoga and practice uh, meditation that leads to bliss. and God bless them all. I didn't know as much about them as perhaps I know a little more now, but that wasn't the script I was in. I was in the Jewish script. I was in history. You don't, maybe you want to be someplace else, but I had inherited a sense of history. I had inherited a sense that we live lives that are consequential in chronological time. And so in chronological time occur tragedies, realizations, romantic um, absolutes, like I think in the Jewish imagination, Jacob and Rachel is a kind of absolute. Um, when Jacob had maybe four wives, four women with whom he had progeny, but the prophet says Rachel is weeping for her children. The Jewish imagination cleaves to the beloved wife, and that means it knows there is such a thing. In plural marriage, of course, there's these ugly rivalries between the wives, but which eventually, 10th century, led the rabbis to abolish polygamy. But taking out that superannuated feature of the biblical stories, what people understand from those stories is that there is a competition involved in love. There's a race. Not everybody gets everything, and there's no dodging that.
And you're against getting out of what you call the female predicament.
Yeah,
It's full of vulnerabilities, this
yeah,
erotic vulnerability, not just you can be beat up in the alley, but this erotic
yeah,
vulnerability. And you conclude that chapter with the following statement. The big question, here's the big question. The big question, you say, was how to endow our feminine existence with ineradicable value and how to endow our values with feminine existence.
yeah.
It's,
Yeah, I saw things in tension. The philosophic and perhaps even religious traditions that educated young people, young women inherited. We graduated from college, um, did not put feminine, um, the romantic kind of feminine existence in the roster with values. Values were either impersonal and neuter or masculine. And it seemed to me that one had some kind of quest, uh, dynamic inherent in the search for high purpose, high value, and the need that could not, the requirement that nobody could dodge honestly to realize one's femininity. Um, the culture at that time gave women a few years in which to accomplish the second, and of course, eternity to accomplish the first. That seemed to me to be quite a predicament, and it seemed um, urgent, therefore, to find some way to merge eternal values and the very contingent, fragile, destructible value of femininity.